I've been blacksmithing for about 5 years. Every week I go to the meeting of my local smithing club. We all get together and do an event called an open forge where we get together and do work and teach new people. It's super fun. And I spend a lot of my time at open forges teaching new blacksmiths how to do simple projects like hooks and leaves. And I love it. I'm not the world's greatest smith, but I'm a decent teacher and I love working with students. But when you're teaching new students, one of the biggest problems they have is hammers. And hammers were a huge problem for me when I was getting started. So this is the first hammer I ever tried to smith with. It's just a 2-pound hand sledge. And I started with this because when I started blacksmithing, I was super broke and I couldn't afford a nice hammer. So I already owned this, and some of the other blacksmiths showed me how to regrind the faces, and I used it, and it was okay. It's not great because it's not made for smithing. It's too long, which makes it harder to control, and the faces are a lot smaller than you want. It's just not great. Then I switched over to using this cross-peen hammer. Cross-peen hammers are great, and lots of smiths use them. But again, this one isn't made for blacksmithing. The extra length makes it harder to control, and it has small faces. It's just not actually intended for working with hot steel. So the summer that I started smithing, I got incredibly lucky. I went to a flea market and I found this vintage Heller Brothers hammer. It was just sitting in a bucket of hammerheads, and I was super lucky. I bought it for $5, which is a great deal, and I took it back to my shop and I cleaned up the faces and I put a new handle on it, and hold on, I can't snap left-handed. There we go. It made an enormous difference in my smithing. As soon as I switched over to a hammer that was actually made for blacksmithing, I got way better. So many of the things people were trying to teach me just suddenly made sense. And rounding hammers are particularly good for new blacksmiths because it's so easy to understand the way they work. A rounding hammer has 2 faces. We also call these dies. This one, obviously, is called the rounding face or rounding die. It's got an aggressive dome shape to it, and this is made from moving metal quickly. So when you're drawing out, tapering, or spreading material, you can get a lot of work done fast with this aggressive domed face. The other side is called the flatting face or flatting die. It's obviously flat, and its function is really easy to understand. It's for making your work flatter and also for cleaning it up and getting rid of hammer marks. We call this planishing. It's really important when you're trying to produce clean work. When you're teaching somebody how to smith, the rounding hammer, which has been popularized by guys like Brian Brazil and Alex Steele, this hammer is super easy to get people to understand. You can just say, use your rounding die for moving metal fast, switch to your flatting die for cleaning things up. It's a great teaching tool. The problem is that rounding hammers are, well, they can be really expensive. When I first started out, you'd have to pay generally for one that was made by a blacksmith, and those were $150 or $200. Totally fair because it takes a lot of work, but I was broke. I didn't have that money, and that's why I was regrinding general purpose hammers and trying to make them work. Luckily, since then, blacksmithing has continued to become more popular, and there are a lot more options. One of the biggest problems I have teaching at my smithing club is the hammers we have at the club, the hammers that students use, are really mediocre. We have a lot of rusty old ball peen and cross peen hammers with crappy handles. They suck. And when someone is brand new to smithing and they're using a lousy hammer, it makes the learning process so frustrating and slow. I think that's why some people don't stick with the craft. So I thought it would be great if I bought 2 new, inexpensive rounding hammers. I could do a review video about them, and then when the video's done, I'm going to donate these to my smithing club, and then we'll have a pair of hammers for teaching students. The first hammer I bought is called the Nordic Forge rounding hammer. It comes in at 2 pounds. The handle is made of hickory, and it's nice and comfortable, doesn't have too much finish on it. The head itself is really nicely machined. The rounding face is really pronounced and aggressive, which I like to see. It's got a great smooth shape, but it does have a very sharp chamfer on the edge. You can see where they just chamfered it here on the lathe, and that line, believe it or not, is going to be a big problem for smithing. You're going to get that line in your work, and you're going to get a lot more marks than you want. So we're going to have to do something about that. Flipping it over and looking at the flatting die, that is really well finished, but it has that same super hard chamfer on the edge. It needs to be flat and smooth, but it also needs a much more gradual transition from the flatting face to the sides of the hammer. That hard chamfer is going to be a problem, especially when you're planishing and trying to smooth out your work. The grip of the handle is excellent, especially the lower half of it, but when you get up towards the higher part, it's very skinny, and there's not like a great reason for that. I don't need a skinny little grip. And sometimes when I'm up here holding the head to do detail work, I still want a pretty substantial handle. So that's one of the few details I don't like. Otherwise, this hammer looks great out of the package. I don't think it's going to take a ton of work, and I'm looking forward to using it. The second hammer I got is by Blacksmith Depot, and that's the actual company I bought it from. You can go to their website. They have a number of really great products for blacksmiths. This hammer comes in at 1.85 pounds, but they also have a slightly heavier one available. The handle of this one is outstanding. I love it. It is made of American ash. It's got a big, fat, oval profile, and it's basically the same thickness at the bottom and the top. So no matter where you're gripping it, you're getting a good handful, and it's very comfortable. It supports your hand. I have big hands, and this is a very big handle. It's comfortable for me, but because there's extra material here, if you have smaller hands, it's very easy to sand or shave a little bit of this off and suit it to your grip. So the handle is perfect the way it is. The head is super well machined with really smooth transitions and none of those sharp chamfers you found on the Nordic Forge. So I like this one better so far, except that the rounding face is hardly round at all. It's got barely any radius to it. I almost can't tell the difference between the rounding die and the flatting die. And that's a problem because this is a rounding hammer and it's not going to be able to do that aggressive spreading of metal that you're looking for. So this one probably needs a lot of work in order to be useful. Now, the Blacksmith Depot website mentions these shortcomings. They say you're probably going to need to dress or reshape the rounding die. They understand what's going on here. They're trying to make a product at a certain price that they know there's a market for. And when you're trying to hold prices down, I mean, look, I have a tool company. When you're trying to hold prices down, you're gonna have compromises. So Blacksmith Depot is putting out the best hammer they can at a low, affordable price. And I'm not gonna criticize them too much for that. I'm just gonna see what I can do to fix it. In fact, we're gonna try and fix the shortcomings of both of these hammers, and then we're gonna take them and see how they actually work at the forge. I'm going to start with the Nordic Forge hammer because this one comes with the best shape and the best machining out of the package. It's got a great rounding face, a great flatting face, and mostly I just don't like the transitions. What I'm going to work on here is the edges. I don't need to work on the face because those came really good from the factory. I'm just going to work on those areas with the hard chamfers. Now, this is a hard steel hammer and it takes a fair bit of work and time, but I'm also using 120 grit paper. And so the work goes quickly enough. And just that is a huge improvement. But I can improve it, so I'm going to follow up with 180 grit. And then once I've done all of that with the random orbital sander, I'm going to switch to strips of 220 grit paper and I'm going to pull those over the edge of the hammer so they work those edges even more and the paper creates an even better radius. I'm going to do the same thing on the flat face, focusing on the edges, working with the random orbital sander, and then also the strips of 220 paper to get those chamfers and those transitions to be as smooth as possible. Once I've gone over this hammer, it looks like it's going to forge beautifully. I'm really excited about using it. Before we do that, let's fix up the Blacksmith Depot hammer. This one needs much more aggressive reshaping. So instead of the random orbital sander, I'm going to start with my stand-up belt sander with an 80 grit belt. This isn't like a specialized metalworking tool, it's just for woodworking. And if you don't have a big machine like this, you could use a smaller belt sander just clamped to a bench or some other solid surface. What I want to do with this machine is create that round face that the hammer is missing out of the package. So I'm rotating it against that aggressive 80 grit belt in big circles. And to start out, I'm staying on the edge. Now this takes a while and I'm doing a lot of work, but I don't really have to worry about overheating because I'm using a belt and that's carrying heat away, and the hammer itself is basically a big heat sink. And as long as I can hold that head in my hand and it's hardly even warming up, I know I don't have to worry about drawing the temper of the head. It's going to be just fine. Regrinding a face like this is a lot easier if you don't have a handle on the head, but this one has a great handle that I want to leave alone. It's getting in the way and I can't grind the lower edge of that rounding die because I can't get the hammer at the right angle. What I need to do is get over to the edge of that sander and swing that handle around until it's perpendicular to the machine. That allows me to get in there and grind the lower portion of that face and then blend it into the rest of that round surface. I'm going to continue to work around and refine that until I have the shape that I want. And then I have a very rough surface left from that 80 grit belt, and I'm going to go back to the random orbital sander. Here, it's the same thing as the last hammer. I'm using 120 grit and then moving on to 180 grit, and then strips of sandpaper, and I'm going for a smooth, nicely finished surface with gentle transitions between the different edges. Both the hammers have been dressed and reshaped, and I'm ready to go forge. So, I packed the car, drove on up to scenic Burton, Ohio, unpacked the car, got out an anvil, set that up, got the forge lit and burning hot, cut some stock, found some tongs, and now I'm ready to forge. And I'm going to start with the Nordic Forge, which has a great face for tapering and drawing out. It's working wonderfully as a rounding hammer, aggressive, moves material quickly, and it also works for more delicate tapering and working on a fine point. It's really everything I could want. But when I switch over to that flatting face, it's a big disappointment. When I'm trying to smooth my work out, I'm actually adding hammer marks instead of taking them away. And as I'm working with the hammer, what I realized is that that flatting face is way too flat. Not just the transitions at the edges, but the actual face itself. So on a really good rounding hammer, even the flatting die needs to have a slight radius to it, a crown. It's difficult to see on camera. I don't think I can get quite close enough, but you can really see it when you get a good rounding hammer up close. It has very easy transitions at the edges, but a gentle curve over the whole thing. While I was working with this hammer and getting a little bit frustrated with it, one of the older smiths walked by and he said, "Hey, I've got that hammer. I find the flatting face impossible to work with. It leaves marks all over my work." And we had a good laugh about that because I was having the exact same problem. He said he's got one of these and he hardly ever uses it because he finds the flatting face so difficult. Now, as the evening progressed and I worked with it more, I was able to compensate for that. If you get that swing really dead on parallel to your work, you can do a great job of cleaning up. And I got much better with it over time. But again, I would expect that this would frustrate a beginner. If I told somebody to go flatten out their work with this face, they would probably make it worse, not better. I didn't expect this to be a big problem, but in use, this hammer really had some shortcomings. At this point, I had finished half a project, and it was time to switch over to the other hammer, and so now I'm trying out the Blacksmith Depot hammer. This one was a big surprise. I was expecting this to be a much worse hammer because it needed so much more work, but I liked it much more. After I gave this a true round face on the belt sander, it works beautifully. It's great for tapering and drawing out. It works for fine stuff and details. And the big surprise is the flatting die, which was much better than the Nordic Forge hammer. This one, you can see it just with the naked eye. That gentle, slight radius that allows you to not be totally perfect with your hammer strikes and still get a nice, smooth surface. So when I go to planish and erase hammer marks with this hammer, it actually works, and my work gets cleaner looking instead of looking more banged up. So this hammer is maybe a little bit light at 1.85 pounds, but they sell a slightly heavier one, which I would probably go for if I was buying this again. Overall, this hammer was a very pleasant surprise. It worked much better than the Nordic Forge. So I really wanted to say that one of these hammers was going to be an easy purchase and you'd be able to just start smithing, but honestly, both of them need work. I think the thing that you want to do if you're starting blacksmithing anyway is you want to join a club. I have been a proud member of the Western Reserve Artist Blacksmiths Association since 2018. We go every week and forge, and I get to learn from more experienced people. I get to teach beginners. We've got good club equipment. It's super fun. It's like the only social thing I really do. There's a lot of clubs all around America, Great Britain, Canada. I'm sure a lot of the world has smithing clubs, even if one of them's kind of far away. I mean, I drive almost an hour to my club. You should still join a smithing club if you possibly can. This is a difficult craft to figure out by yourself. Once you know some more experienced smiths, and once you have access to some equipment, like maybe a nice belt grinder, buying one of these inexpensive rounding hammers and reshaping it with somebody to help you, that's no big deal. An experienced blacksmith can help you regrind a hammer in 20 minutes, and it's not difficult. So I think that's what you want to do. You can buy one of these, but then you want to take it to somebody who knows more than you do and have them help you modify it. Looking at these was really interesting. I am super pleased to see that decent hammers are available at a good price. $50 or under $50 for either one of these. When I started out, there really wasn't anything like that. I still don't see on the market that one killer hammer that comes in at $50 or $65 and just gives you out of the package performance, but that might not be possible at this price point. You might just need to spend a little bit more money. It's something I'm going to keep looking at and keep working on. Also, while I was up at the club, I did a complete video. I did an S-hook, which is the standard beginner project, and I have all that footage, and so what we're going to do is put together a video that shows you everything you need to know about doing that first project. So when you go to that club for the first time, you'll kind of have an idea of what's going on, and you'll know what to expect. You can look forward to that in just a couple of weeks. Patreon.com/Rex Krueger. You can go to support these videos. Only my patrons make this stuff possible, and we appreciate them more than I can say. Hope you guys like a quick little diversion into non-woodworking. I enjoy the blacksmithing almost as much, and I'd like to do more smithing content. Let me know down in the description if you'd like to see more of that. Down in the comments, not the description. Man, I'm tired. Thanks for watching.